Officer Marcus Brandt, a white cop in Carverton, slaps Dr. Aisha Coleman, a black woman in a pristine blazer, during a late-night traffic stop on a deserted downtown street, her luxury SUV gleaming under flickering lamps. He smirks, expecting her to crumble, but her icy stare unnerves him as a bystander's phone flashes. Then she whispers, "You'll regret this," and his gut twists. Little does he know, this split-second act ignites a firestorm that'll torch his career, his life, and everything he believes about power in this city. What's her next move? Before we dive in, where are you watching from? If you stand for justice kicking back at arrogance, hit like and subscribe, because tomorrow's special episode is one you won't want to miss. Marcus Brandt gripped the steering wheel of his beat-up cruiser, the engine humming low as he tore down Carverton's silent downtown streets, the flickering lamps casting jagged pools of light across the cracked asphalt. His knuckles whitened, still buzzing from the sting of his open palm cracking across Dr. Aisha Coleman's face. A black woman who dared to step out of her sleek luxury SUV with a spine too straight for his liking. That slap had felt good, righteous even, a quick lesson for her type rolling through his turf. Carverton's gentrified white enclave where he'd spent 10 years keeping the lines clear. Her pristine blazer, her polished shoes, her steady hands passing over that license. It all screamed money, confidence, things he figured didn't belong on someone like her in a place like this. Not at 2 in the morning, not on his watch. He'd pulled her over 10 minutes ago, clocking that shiny black sedan gliding past the boutique storefronts and overpriced cafes. A car too nice for this hour, too nice for the profile he'd built in his head. Suspicious, he told himself, flicking on the siren, though deep down it was her posture that set him off, the way she'd climbed out without a tremble. No hint of the deference he'd squeezed out of dozens of others with a glare or a shove. Black drivers didn't get to glide through here, not without his say, not without shrinking under his stare. She'd handed over her license, her fingers steady, her voice smooth as glass when she asked, "What's the reason for this stop, officer?" No shake, no bow, just those dark eyes locking onto his like she had the right to question him. That's when the heat had flared up his neck, the itch to put her in her place, to remind her who ran these streets. "You don't ask me questions," he'd barked, snatching the card, her name blurring in his squint. Dr. Aisha Coleman, some fancy title he didn't care to cluck. "Open the trunk, now." She tilted her head, calm as a statue, and said, "I'd like to know why." That did it. Her defiance, her refusal to grovel, it gnawed at him. A challenge to the order he'd enforced night after night, the one that kept Carverton Heights clean, kept people like her on the other side of the tracks where they belonged. He'd stepped closer, towering over her 5'6" frame, his 6'2" bulk casting a shadow across her face, and when she didn't flinch, didn't drop her gaze, he'd swung. The slap landed hard, a sharp clap that bounced off the empty storefronts, her cheek blooming red under the streetlight. And he smirked, waiting for the tears, the cowering he'd seen 100 times before. But she didn't break, didn't even blink, just stood there, her stillness a wall he couldn't punch through, her eyes slicing into him like she saw past the badge, past the gun, into the rot he kept buried. His smirk faltered just for a second, a flicker of unease he shook off as some punk with a phone stepped out from the shadows, red dot blinking, filming the whole damn thing. Marcus didn't care, let them record. It'd be another blip, another nothing that'd fade by morning. He'd yanked her wrists behind her back, the cold steel cuffs snapping tight, biting into her skin until faint red lines welled up against her dark complexion. She didn't cry out, didn't fight, just exhaled a soft breath so controlled it twisted his stomach, a sound that mocked his force without a word. "Resisting arrest," he growled, loud enough for the camera, his voice rough with the authority he'd wielded 1,000 times, figuring it'd paint her as the problem, the criminal, not him, not the cop doing his job in a city that never blinked at a little roughing up. He shoved her toward the cruiser, the dented door creaking as he swung it open, ignoring the punk's murmurs, the flash of that phone multiplying as another shadow joined, then another. 3, maybe 4 bystanders now, their whispers turning to shouts, but he brushed it off. They'd tire out, post their little clips, move on, same as always. Carverton didn't care about one more stop gone sideways, not in a place where the news shrugged at worse. He pushed her into the back seat, her frame sliding in with a grace that grated on him, like she was stepping into a boardroom, not a cage. The door slammed shut, the thud echoing down the block, a punctuation mark on his control, or so he told himself. Circling to the rear side, he slid in, adjusting the rearview mirror out of habit, ready to peel out and leave the gawkers behind. But then he caught her reflection. Those eyes again, steady, unyielding, staring straight ahead, not at the floor, not at her cuffed hands, but through the glass, through him. A calm so deep it felt like a threat, and his fingers fumbled on the keys. A split-second stutter he covered with a cough. She was nobody, he told himself, just playing tough, waiting for her one call to some slick lawyer who'd bluster and fold. The engine roared to life, and he gunned it, tires screeching as he tore away from the curb, the shouts fading into a dull hum, replaced by the crackle of the radio spitting routine calls, lulling him back into the rhythm of a night he thought he owned. 15 minutes later, he rolled into the precinct lot, a squat brick bunker bathed in flickering sodium light, the air thick with exhaust and damp concrete. He holed her out, gripping her elbow tighter than he needed to, dragging her up the chipped steps, her heels clicking with a precision that irritated him, a sound too sharp, too composed for someone in cuffs. Through the double doors, he shoved her into the lobby, expecting the usual chaos, desk sergeants barking, phones ringing, a drunk slumped in chairs. But the room went quiet, a hush so sudden it prickled his skin. Every head snapping up, pens stalling over forms, coffee cups freezing mid-sip. A dozen pairs of eyes pinned him, wide, unblinking, like he'd walked in with a ghost trailing behind him. He smirked, figuring it was just the cuffs, another perp in tow, nothing new. "Process her," he barked at the rookie behind the intake desk, a kid with a patchy beard and a nervous twitch, shoving Aisha forward, resisting, disorderly, the works. His voice bounced off the walls, filling the silence with his version of the truth, the one he'd spin to keep this clean. But the rookie didn't move, just stared, mouth half open, his clipboard trembling in his hands. Marcus frowned, unease flickering again, sharper this time, her silence louder than the room's, her weight pressing against his chest. "What's the damn holdup?" he barked, stepping closer to Jensen, towering over the kid, expecting him to jump. But Jensen just shook his head, slow, dazed, muttering, "That's Dr. Coleman," like it was a prayer or a curse. Marcus's smirk twitched, the name still a blank in his head, some uppity type he never bothered to clock. He opened his mouth to snap again, to demand they process her, when the double doors banged open, a gust of damp night air flooding in behind Captain Elena Torres. Her broad frame cut through the frozen crowd, her boots stomping the linoleum, her face drained of color, but her eyes wild with a fury Marcus hadn't seen in his 5 years under her. She zeroed in on Aisha, then Marcus, and before he could blink, she was on him, her voice cracking like a whip. "You idiot! She's the chief of police." The words hit like a sucker punch, air rushing out of his lungs, his knees locking as the room spun. Chief of police! Dr. Aisha Coleman! His world tilted, the floor shifting under his boots. This black woman, the one he'd pegged as a nobody, some lawyer or activist he could shove into a cell and forget, was Carverton's top cop, the one who signed his checks, who ran the whole damn department. No, that couldn't be right. Not her. Not in this city where his badge had always been enough to silence questions. He'd seen the chief's name in memos, heard it in briefings, but never pictured this, never imagined a black woman in a luxury SUV could hold that kind of power. His mind scrambled, grasping for footing, and he forced a laugh, brittle and sharp, spilling out before he could stop it. Self-defense, he spat, squaring his shoulders, planting his boots firm. She resisted, provoked me. You've got my back, right, Torres? The laugh died in his throat as Torres's eyes narrowed, a vein pulsing in her temple. She stepped closer, close enough for him to smell the coffee on her breath, her hands trembling with something he couldn't name. Not yet. Uncuff her, Brant. Now, she growled, her tone a blade that sliced through his bravado. He bristled, jaw tightening, because no, this was his caller, his call. He'd felt her defiance, her challenge when she'd questioned his stop, and he wasn't about to let some desk jockey undo it, not over a woman he'd already put in her place, or so he thought. She's a nobody, he shot back, doubling down, his voice rising to fill the silence. Dr. Coleman who? Some fancy nobody. The room. He didn't look back, didn't give them the satisfaction, his boots pounding the asphalt as he beelined for his truck, a rusted pickup parked crooked in the corner. The slap he'd landed on Dr. Aisha Coleman, Carverton's chief of police, still buzzed in his palm, a righteous sting he clung to despite the chaos it had sparked. Suspension? Fine. He'd ride it out, same as he'd done with every complaint in his 10 years on the force. This was just noise, a storm that'd blow over once the brass cooled off and the crowd found something else to scream about. He fled out of the lot, tires screeching, the precinct shrinking in his rear view. As he tore through Carverton's gentrified streets, past the boutique storefronts and overpriced cafes he'd spent a decade keeping clean, his duplex in Carverton Heights loomed ahead, a squat two-story box with peeling paint and a sagging porch, a fortress he'd carved out in this white enclave where people like Aisha didn't belong. Not in his world. He slammed the truck door, stomped up the steps, and locked himself inside, the deadbolt clicking with a finality that steadied his pulse. The TV flickered on, a reflex to drown out the echo of her voice, that soft, chilling, "You've started something you can't stop," she'd whispered as Torres uncuffed her. He snorted, flipping to a news channel, expecting the usual late-night filler, maybe a car chase or a bar fight. But there she was. Dr. Aisha Coleman filled the screen, her midnight blue suit crisp against the backdrop of Carverton City Hall, her dark eyes steady, unyielding, the same ones he'd met with his slap. Her cheek bore no mark now. The red bloom faded, but her presence cut deeper than any bruise. "We're launching a full probe into Officer Marcus Brant's 10-year record," she said, her voice a blade of calm slicing through the static. "No one is above accountability." The words sank into his gut, heavy and cold, but he forced a smirk, leaning back on his lumpy couch, the springs groaning under his 6'2" frame. A probe? Let her dig. He'd buried his tracks, greased the right palms, kept his rough nights quiet. She'd find nothing, and he'd be back on the beat in a week, badge gleaming, laughing about this with the guys. The smirk held until the window exploded, glass sprayed across the living room, shards glittering on the worn carpet as a brick thudded to a stop near his boots. He jumped, heart slamming against his ribs, the TV's hum drowned by the crash. Scrawled in jagged red ink across the bricks, "Rough Hand Face," were 2 words, "Racist Pig." His breath caught, the air thickening with a sudden sharp panic he hadn't felt since his rookie days. He snatched the brick, fingers trembling, and peered through the shattered pane. Shadows shifted beyond his porch, a handful of figures scattering into the dark, their footsteps fading down the street. The protesters had found him. How the hell did they know where he lived? He grabbed his phone, thumbing through contacts, dialing his crew, the ones who'd traded beers over stories of keeping Carverton Heights in line. First call, straight to voicemail. Second, a dead ring. Third, nothing. Silence from every name he'd counted on. Guys who nodded at his stops, laughed off the complaints, backed him when the heat got close. Now they were ghosts, leaving him alone with the brick's weight in his hand. The TV looping Aisha's presser, her voice a relentless drone promising justice he couldn't outrun. He scrolled online, the clip of his slap now a wildfire, racking up 1 million views, comments scrolling too fast to read. Racist cop, fire him, jail's too good. His address popped up in a thread, an anonymous tip pinned to the top, and his stomach lurched. Someone had sold him out. The first rock hit the front door, a dull thunk that jolted him to his feet. Then another cracking against the siding, followed by a bottle shattering on the porch. He bolted to the window, peering through the blinds, and saw them, a mob swelling in the street, 20, maybe 30 strong, their faces twisted with rage, phones flashing, signs swinging. Justice for Aisha. Brant must pay. The chants punched through the walls, a rhythm that shook the duplex's flimsy frame. He grabbed a chair, wedging it under the doorknob, his pulse hammering as more rocks rained down, pinging off the truck, denting the hood. A brick sailed through the kitchen window, smashing a cabinet, and he ducked, glass crunching under his boots. This was his space, his sanctuary, and they were tearing it apart piece by piece, all because of her, because he'd raised his hand to a black woman he'd pegged as nothing. He yanked the curtain shut, barricaded the door with a bookshelf, his breath ragged as the mob's roar grew louder, closer, fists pounding the siding, a bottle torching the mailbox with a whoosh of flame. He thought about his gun, locked in the precinct safe, useless now, and cursed under his breath. They'd tire out, he told himself, sweat beading on his brow as he paced the shrinking room. They always did. These things faded, burned out, left him standing. The pounding slowed, the shouts dulled, and he peeked out, saw the street emptying, the mob dispersing into the night, leaving a trail of broken glass and charred wood. His chest loosened, a shaky grin tugging his lips. He'd survived. They'd thrown their fit and he was still here, still whole. Let Aisha dig her probe, let the crowd scream. He'd outlast them all. He sank onto the couch, the TV still blaring, her face, her promise of accountability looping like a taunt. The brick sat heavy in his lap, racist pig staring up at him, but he tossed it aside, forcing that grin wider. He'd call in favors tomorrow, lean on the guys who'd ghosted him tonight, get this squared away. The clip would die down, the views would plateau, and Carverton would forget, same as it always had when he'd bent the rules. He grabbed a beer from the fridge, the cold can steadying his shaking hands, and took a long swig, the bitter taste grounding him. He'd won this round, kept his ground, kept his house. The storm was over, or so he believed, sinking back into the cushions, the tension bleeding out of his shoulders. Then his phone buzzed, a sharp jolt that cut through the quiet. He fished it from his pocket, expecting a buddy finally checking in, a lifeline from the crew he'd built. But the screen glowed with a text. No name, no number he knew, just 6 words that froze the beer in his throat. Your past is next. His grin vanished, his pulse spiking as the room spun, the brick's weight sinking back in, the chants echoing in his skull. Who'd sent it? How'd they get his number? The TV flickered, Aisha's eyes locking onto his through the glass, and he realized this wasn't the end, not even close. The slap hadn't just sparked a protest, hadn't just cost him a night. It had opened a door he couldn't shut, a reckoning he couldn't see coming, and whatever she had planned, it was clawing closer, sharper, deadlier than the mob's rocks. He stumbled to the window, peering into the dark, the street empty now, but heavy with a silence that pressed against his chest. The text glowed in his hand, a promise he couldn't shake, and he scrolled the news again, catching a headline, Chief Coleman vows deep investigation. His gut twisted, the beer slipping from his grip, splashing across the carpet. He thought he was safe, thought he'd held the line, but the mob was just a start, the brick just a warning. What the hell was she digging up? What past was she dragging into the light? He locked the door again, the deadbolts click, a hollow comfort, because deep down, he knew Aisha wasn't done, and whatever came next would hit harder than anything he'd faced tonight. Marcus Brant slumped on his sagging couch, the Carverton Heights duplex a fortress of shadows, the shattered window letting in a damp breeze that stirred the glass shards littering his carpet. The brick with racist pig scrawled in red ink sat discarded by his boots, a taunt he couldn't shake since the mob had torn through his street hours ago. The TV flickered. Dr. Aisha Coleman filled the screen, her midnight blue suit crisp against the backdrop of Carverton City Hall, her dark eyes steady, unyielding, the same ones he'd met with his slap. Her cheek bore no mark now,